Tim Kennedy, who you have met and he has met us, is offering a reflection on Dharma practice this morning. When Tim Kennedy retired from professional practice and teaching landscaping architecture and urban design, he turned to landscape painting as a daily practice. Minnesota Zen Center and Santa Barbara Zen Center have been integral as sanghas in the formation of his meditation practice. Jikoji and Hokyoji monasteries have been places of refuge for sesshin and retreat. In September of 2023, he received Jukai from his teacher, Tim Burkett, who gave him the Dharma name, Ensō. So I'm very, very happy to welcome Tim Kennedy this morning. And Tim, the floor is yours, as they say.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be with you all. Great to meet you again. Thank you for asking me to join you. It was during the pandemic that I was invited to join the weekly sit at SBZC using Zoom. I'm in western Minnesota on the banks of the Red River of the North. So it's this sangha that helped me to do what I couldn't do myself, which was to establish a regular practice of Zazen meditation. I have this parallel practice too that I wanted to talk about today. It has to do with drawing and painting. So since my early childhood, drawing has been a means for me to understand the world. At 7 years old, in second grade, Mrs. Gainey's class, I drew a large group scene from memory of skaters on a frozen pond. I found that if I drew the neck, that's something that I hadn't drawn before. I didn't understand. Then a neck scarf drawn horizontally would express the movement of the skating figures. And later in secondary school, age 16, my drawing teacher taught me how to do still life drawings in charcoal. And Bob Erickson championed my interest in drawing. My drawing practice also became an antidote to my adolescent angst. Since then, drawing, painting have been an ongoing Dharma practice which places my existence in the here and now, or what the Taoists refer to as flow. Drawing has also been my Ariadne's thread, who in Greek myth helped Perseus to find his way out of the labyrinth. From my charcoal drawings, I won an art award graduating from secondary school, and serendipitously, I found myself attending Bard College, a progressive liberal arts college located on the Hudson River, 2 hours north of New York City. Dropping out of my junior year, I moved to New York City in 1973 and was active in the downtown art scene around Soho. And I was making painterly films and showing them in venues downtown and later at the Whitney Museum. But as an undergraduate, I wanted to say, and later as a graduate student of art and architecture, I was trained as a modernist, 20th century modernist. So I finished my degree at the New School in the West Village, where I studied with Rosalind Brown, who showing a portrait of hers here. She had been a WPA mural artist, a student of Hans Hofmann, and an accomplished abstract artist. From her, I learned how an abstract painting was all about structure and composition, minus any narrative content. Also about abstract modern art with mystical qualities. Before I left New York for San Francisco, I briefly was a security guard at the Museum of Modern Art, and as a result felt distance from the art marketplace. Yeah. While attending the San Francisco Art Institute, in their Master of Fine Arts program, I realized in the first semester that the diploma would not be a union card. It was not really viable for that. So I began working with a landscape architect, Jeffrey Miller, doing design build gardens all around the Bay Area for my bread and butter. In spring of 1984, as an itinerant workman, I visited Tassajara and had an awakening in their Zendo. 6 months later, I was married to my wife, now of 41 years, and moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts. From there, I joined the Cornell University Masters of Landscape Architecture program in Ithaca, New York. I'm originally from upstate New York, so it was a familiar landscape to me. And in 1988, I went to work for Caesar Pelli and Associates in New Haven, Connecticut, where I was involved in large commercial urban design projects, like the one shown here, the World Financial Center Winter Garden. Always reminds me a little bit of the Emerald City. But you see those Washingtonian palm trees are from the desert in Southern California. They're bespoke designed furniture around the base. And against the big glass facade, you can see the two diagonals of escalators from the upper level, the mezzanine level. Underneath the escalator on the left is a giant room. Well, it's basically a room with a giant computer that's monitoring the environment 24/7 to keep those Washingtonians alive. Later in 1991, I joined the faculty of the School of Environmental Design at the University of Georgia. I retired from teaching after 23 years. My final post was at the American University outside of Dubai in the Persian Gulf. And my teaching experience as a professor of landscape architecture, I taught an iterative process of discrete steps. Iterative meaning, one thing, reiteration helps you to understand the previous concept and lead you to something more nuanced. I can also see this now in my painting process today. Also, I taught something called genus loci, or spirit of place, which is a divining what the site wants by investigating its context, that is cultural, social, and economic. If you look at a map, there's a spirit of place is not on the map. It's just kind of an abstract, but very real experience. In cultural landscape studies, it's understood that, quote, the landscape shapes the culture and the culture shapes the landscape. So it was a challenge to teach undergraduate design students a self-generative design process. Only a fifth of any total project budget is allocated to design time. So I was trying to teach them how to rapidly or effectively move through the process. But I would have to tell the freshman design students, that nothing in your previous classes has prepared you for this class. That is, there's no answers, right answers in the back of the book. And research shows, I did research on this, that thinking creatively is not about intelligence. It's not a matter of IQ. I hope you can all see this. Creativity is more of an intimate experience, allowing a subject to reveal its multiple faces. So we're looking at a Necker cube here, and it has this push and pull complementarity. You can see that the upper part of the cube can project forward, the lower part projecting back, but that can also reverse. And that it's hovering in front of this white plane with black dots on it. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Good. Now, can you shift your focus to where the white plane, instead of the black dots, are apertures or little holes that you're looking through? And you're looking through them to see the white Necker cube behind the white plane.
Mhm.
Okay, good. So creativity is like looking for a needle in a haystack, but it's also looking for and finding multiple needles. I used to quote Einstein to my students. He said, creativity is a gift and a tool. I would try to show to them that that applies in design as well as in life. I taught generative creativity techniques to unblock the design student or the design student's design process. For instance, I used something called Janusian thinking. You know, Janus was the Roman god he was the god of thresholds. He had a face, and he also had a face on the back of his head, looking both ways. It has to do with the ability to hold two contradictory thoughts at the same time. So, for instance, can you conceive of imagining your mother as an old woman and an infant at the same time? One thing that seems to happen is that the logical, rational part of the brain kind of gets fed up with that. I said, I don't know what to do with this, shuts down. And then other things can kind of come out of the unconscious mind a little more easily. Latent potential. So latent potential is based on willingness to creatively observe irrelevant information and find latency. Happens with any subject. There's this story of a guy in the Twin Cities, Minnesota. He worked for 3M. He was on a design research project. They were looking at creating a new design for blackboards that would be movable. You could move them from room to room. But they were having trouble with it all. And while he was singing in a choir in a church in St. Paul on a Sunday, he had this aha moment, this eureka moment, where he realized that the problem was scale, size. And he reduced the size, turned the material into a piece of paper, put a little stickum on it, and the Post-it was born. So, if you take something through a design process, it can morph. Like this diagram here, on the left, you can see that the outer diamonds on the figure are creating a star, or is the star creating the diamonds? If we move over to the figure on the right, with just the addition of 3 lines in the center of the design, I don't have a pointer here, do I? If you look at the diamond shape in the upper left, suddenly it starts to become the top of a cube that descends to 2 cubes going in different directions.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. And on the upper right, it can happen again. That top cube is attached to a face, 2 side faces that descend and meet 2 other cubes.
Mm-hmm.
Latent potential.
Mm.
An idea, a form can metamorph into something very different. I also wanted to mention creative acceptance. It involves allowing your own creative impulses to surface without self-censorship, perfectionism, or fear of judgment. It also has, in a life crisis context, it is the conscious practice of embracing painful or uncertain life experiences with openness while using creativity and inner resourcefulness to adapt, grow, or find meaning in the midst of suffering. An example of this latency is Michelangelo's David. As the story goes, it was derived, they get these 5 foot by 5 foot by 15 foot blocks of Carrara marble that are, back in the day, were slid on a sled down the slopes, brought to Florence, where there were two sculptors had gotten a commission from the Pope. They hacked away at it and then gave up. They said there was something wrong with the marble. I suspect they might have had collaborative differences. So 40 years later, Michelangelo sees this unhewn block. And as he says in his writings, he would look at the grain as it was moving through the stone. And from that, he would get a concept or an impression of what the figure wanted to be. Then it was a process of just removing those parts that weren't the figure. And 15 months later, David is born. It's an example of what is sometimes referred to as a generative trance. Generative trance is a natural state of consciousness where the conscious and unconscious minds communicate and collaborate together. Generative trance versus negative trance. The negative trance of tyrannical dualistic thinking. Beginner's mind shuns the very tyranny of either or thinking, which is a block for creativity. Well, I mean, it's also the basis for the scientific method, so I'm not like dissing it. The creativity avoids the neuromuscular lock, or what William Blake called the mind-forged manacles. In deep meditation, the mind can drop into a relatively cognitive-free channel. A benefit of sitting, unless it's a desired outcome. Both and implies a non-duality, which is the non-difference of subject and object, where the observer and the observed are ultimately inseparable. So in teaching landscape history and theory, I became acquainted with this genus loci and spirit of place. There's a relevant quote that was popular in the 18th century by Alexander Pope, the poet. He said, quote, "Consult the genius of the place in all." His challenge was to intuit what the site wants, albeit often with a neoclassical narrative that was popular in the day. The classical narrative most often associated with Stourhead is the wandering of Virgil in the Aeneid. So as you go through the series of paths here, a circular paths, you kind of reenact the Aeneid. Pope's quote was later a motto used as a counter argument to the slash and burn modernist practice of one size fits all, which disregarded this spirit of place. I have an elderly friend in Duluth who he told me in tending his garden, he tended his garden for 90 minutes, and who, returning to the house, said he feels like the landscape was, quote, telling him what to do. Also, the Impressionist painter Cézanne is quoted as saying, quote, the landscape thinks itself in me. He would say, and I am its consciousness. To me, this is reminiscent of a meditation experience sitting with a reversal of inside and outside. It also sounds similar to a Taoist painter reading the Dharma. I'll mention more of that in a little bit. But first, I wanted to say that my early mentors were abstract expressionists who taught me that abstract paintings were about structure. The content was elicited by the viewer's unconscious mind. Jackson Pollock, the abstract expressionist painter whose work is shown here, had no windows in his studio. He wasn't doing observational painting. It was all internal. My experience of the modernist seeking inner form has been that it frequently leads to repetition. There's an apocryphal story of Jackson Pollock's summer trip to his hometown in Cody, Wyoming, after becoming a hero of the New York City art world. He did some plein air painting, outdoor painting with a couple of his high school buddies around Cody. Returning to New York City, he told of his new outdoor painting interest. He was pretty excited, and his gallery rejected this approach and insisted that he continue with his signature spatter planings. Within 2 months, he was dead, driving drunk in an automobile accident. Tragic. Corot. Yes, my sensibility has always been intrigued by 3D depth on a 2D surface. 2D and 3D here have a reciprocating tension or push-pull. It's flat, it pops into space, it goes flat again. Sometimes I find this can be quite exhilarating. The push and pull can accelerate. It reveals this complementarity and reversals, like the figure ground that we looked at previously in the Necker cube. Before Corot's time, painters typically worked in their studios creating landscapes as a backdrop to mythological narratives. Corot's Bridge at Narni is unprecedented in the Western world at the time, a fresh outdoor painting that complements the organizing principles of classical painting. He carried his, this was all new. He carried his individual paint colors in desiccated pig bladders. Corot has created a hybrid here, two image aspects outside of studio painting and classical proportions, making a third image, a new kind of image in complementarity. So complementarity, meaning multiple things can be true at the same time. Multiple feelings, grief and sorrow. I'm sorry, grief and anger, or joy and sorrow. This reminds me of when we went through the Platform Sutra with Bill Powell. There is a complementarity between those two sutras. Although the wind blows terribly here, the moonlight also leaks between the roof planks of this ruined house. Izomi Shikabu. David Hinton, in his book, Existence, considers this single painting by the 17th century painter Shi Tao. Hinton researched 17th century Chinese artist intellectuals who interpreted that the landscape is the Dharma and the Dharma is the landscape, i.e. mountains and rivers represent yin and yang, or maybe it's the other way around. I can't. Tim Burkett, my guiding teacher, guided me through several of his books, Taoism, Chan. Hinton, who sees Zen as being empirically based, writes, quote, "There's a mystery everywhere in this painting because it isn't a painting about someone gazing into a beautiful landscape, as it might appear. It is instead a painting about existence, about our open and immediate experience of existence itself. All of Chinese spirituality and art is grounded in this experience. Poetry, calligraphy, painting, Taoist philosophy, Chan, Buddhism, Zen practice, they tell the story of existence, and at the same time, they are spiritual principles that return us to an immediate experience of existence as a cosmological tissue." The practice of landscape painting for the Taoists was a creative act of mirroring the creation of the world. So the stroke of the painting the horizon for the Taoist painter was a cosmological act. Landscape painters mirroring the Dharma, I found this inspiring. So I just wanted to mention creative acceptance again. It led me to pick up painting where I left off upon retiring from teaching. Wishing to distance myself from digital media was a critical factor. As a designer, I used watercolors for presentation drawings to clients before computers in the early 90s. Upon retiring and after 2 years of painting with watercolors, I ventured into oil painting and the prismatic palette with Joe Paquette, whose studio is in St. Paul, Minnesota. My teacher, Tim Burkett at Minnesota Zen Meditation Center, led me to an understanding of the Taoists, which I sought to emulate in my practice of plein air painting. So here is shown my pochade box. A little paint box, it's on site. And you can see I've done the first phase of painting the contours of the composition in front of me. So I just want to go through this iterative painting process, which I will show, thumbnail sketches, shadow study, a color block in, with the context of a prismatic palette to the final pass. Yes, color, my final frontier. Sorry, is that a Star Trek reference? The prismatic palette. It's not a fixed recipe of exact colors, but a structured arrangement of paint on the palette designed to give students a clear, systematic way of seeing and making light, shadow, and atmosphere in painting, especially in landscapes. It's established by Frank Dumont in the late 19th century. It's based on the science of light and color in the open air. I could spend a lot of time on this, but maybe I can show you something in the paintings analogous to this. Well, so first I do a thumbnail sketch. Sometimes I'll do 2 or 3 of them. I'm trying to work the composition into, yeah, what feels right. It's also, well, it's it's helping me to understand the composition. So this prevents, finding out that it's not going to work out when I'm halfway through the painting. So it's iterative, I do this, it helps me understand it. I do the next step, that helps me understand it a little bit more. What I find is that first concepts are most conventional. Working up various thumbnail composition leads to a more nuanced design. I used to tell my students this, we'd go through this, like I'd ask them, if I tell you the name, if I give you the word fish, what can you free associate from fish? And the next name, the next thing might be ocean. But by the sixth, seventh, or eighth iteration of this association, they might say something like mermaid. Or one guy said, what was it? Not mermaid. It was a male version of a mermaid. What would that be? Merman? Merman. So the next step is to block in the shadows. And that helps me to kind of nail down the light effect and ever-changing view. I mean, it can be very overwhelming. The light is changing, the shadows are moving, the colors, did I say the colors are changing? The clouds are moving. Try to paint a cloud, come back to it. Yeah, there's a lot going on there, moment to moment. But the gray values of the shadows are kind of like a architectural blueprint for me. They give me an idea where this is going. And then the color block in. Using the prismatic palette. Yeah, the science of this is, so after about 20 or 30 feet, the yellow color wavelengths, they start to drop out. And then the orange, and then red, and then blue. So that's why you see mountains in the distance are blue. It has to do with the atmosphere, the light refracting through the atmosphere. Another sketch, trying to understand the relationships, proportional relationships between the different forms, and how the eye would move through this. Here's a shadow study to show that the shadows, as they recede in space, the atmosphere affects the color. In this case, the mountains in the distance are bluer than the shadows in the foreground. And they go through these very discrete little changes of value that delineate the 3D space on a two-dimensional surface. And then this is the color lay-in. My teacher, Joe Paquette, pointed out that the greens in the foreground on the right needed to get cooler. And in that way, the warm colors to the left and that rock would be enhanced. It has to do with color relativity. This is the Red River, very close to where I live. This is the sketch that, again, helps me to understand what's going on with the composition. Here I'm starting to block in the colors. I have got to put the colors down to see what the relationships are. I can't figure that out in my head. I have to see it in front of me. And then this is the final pass with color and shadow. Again, in Minnesota, here we have sundown on a slough, a low light effect. of sundown on the water. If you see the profile of the trees in the back, there's a regularity there that they almost look like knuckles on a hand. There's a thing that my brain will do I don't know, if I get tired, sometimes I get tired of looking so intently, my brain will just kind of automatically throw some regularization in. So I had to go back and kind of look at that more closely in the final pass and to get the light effect as it came in on the water in the foreground. In this subject, I sensed a painting narrative suggested in the relationship of twos between the pickup trucks, the grain elevators, and the two drivers in the watering hole, probably holding on to two mugs of beer. Anyway, my wife and I live in rural Minnesota, and the small town which is the site of this painting is not far from our home. Again, it's a spirited place at play here, my daily life. While I live on the northern prairie, it's adjacent to Minnesota's land of 10,000 lakes, where there are lakes both large and small. Big Sand Lake is where I retreat when visiting an old friend. This is great. You wake up with the haunting call of the loons from the lake. For the past 4 years, my wife and I have been spending winter months in Scottsdale, Arizona. The warm desert climate allows me to paint outdoors in the winter, which is not so available in Minnesota. So I'm mirroring two very different landscapes, both with their own color palette, light effects, and atmosphere. Mirroring the landscape in painting acts as a grounding practice by stabilizing attention, resonating with the earth rhythms, and allowing the psyche to root itself in nature's forms. Also, mirroring the landscape in painting is not mere imitation, it's a psychological dialogue between inner and outer worlds. Finally, you do not need to leave your room. Remain sitting at the table and listen. Do not even listen, simply wait. Do not even wait. Be quite still and solitary. The world will freely offer itself to you unmasked. It has no choice. It will roll in ecstasy at your feet. That's always surprising. I didn't know Franz Kafka was into this. And just as a footnote, this is a book by Marcel Minnaert. He was a Belgian-Dutch astronomer who wrote The Nature of Light and Color in the Open Air. I only learned recently that he was also a landscape painter in his day. My instructor, Ernie Gare, showed me this book in 1973, and it's one of a handful of books that I have carried with me throughout the years. Yeah, in closing, I just want to mention it. Another aspect of painting the landscape that I've experienced is how painting, like sitting zazen, removes the inner narrator. Yeah, thank you for listening. And I think I threw a lot of material at you. Please let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Tim. We're absorbing what you shared with us, and now refocusing on your face here. So I'm looking at our gathered group here to see if anyone has a question they'd like to ask. And we have one, so
Yes.
please.
That was fascinating. You talked about the answers not being in the back of the book, and I believe that referred to when you were teaching the landscaping, that you were trying to, if I understood it, if I interpret it correctly, you were trying to trigger within the students. You were trying to get them to get to a point where they had a their own sense of the relationship of bringing out something from the creative use of materials and so on in the landscape creation process. I'm not sure if I got that right.
Yes.
But
Yeah, you right on.
what was there a magic? Was there a strategy to be able to trigger that original sort of creativity, or to get them to bring that out of the students, to give them that capacity?
Yeah, I would try to model it to them, but also, you know, if I ask them, what's half of 13? And they'd say, well, 6.5. Say, oh, that's great. Can you give me another answer? And they were like, what? What? And I'd have to press them. They'd say, well, how about 6.5? And I would ask them again, great, that's great. Give me another one. What's another answer? What would be another solution to that? Half of 13. And I say, what if you drew a line down the middle between 1 and 3? Or what if you turned it into a Roman numeral and, you know, cut it halfway? And it was tricky. Some students, you know, it came down to kind of taking this leap, if you call it a leap of faith or a leap of the imagination. They'd have to not be thinking about what their grade was going to be, but how are they going to get to do this new exciting thing?
Mm.
And that was always exciting for me to see.
So when you got the sense that they were getting into the program, that they sort of pushed aside the practical, and you saw that spark of excitement within them, that was the key moment.
Yeah, I did this other thing where I'd have the students, we'd go out on a field trip, and I'd have them buy 2 toys. One was a battery powered toy, and one was a wind-up toy. And we'd come back to the studio and take them all apart. And all parts would be on the table, and then they would make a new toy out of that, like a hybrid. And some students really struggled with it. Others, like I say, took that leap. You know, my teacher, Tim Burkett, was referring to Zazen practice as he made some reference to, it's like stepping off a 100-foot pole. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Yeah, I can't remember where that's from.
It's in a koan.
Where?
It's part of a koan, Bill said.
Oh. So yeah, that's yeah, creative act, a generative trance. Yeah, my students taught me a lot about this.
That's right.
I think what's interesting what you just said about dividing the 13, and then where my mind went trying to move that into a different space. And it's really fascinating because it reminds me of my morning practice when I'm writing. So my mind once the options, kind of the simple, clear options of like dividing it in a different way, that's more literal, started to go into a more metaphorical or symbolic space.
Mm.
And then that space started to open up to another space of something one might call tangential, and at the same time, maybe not. That it just opened up something as I allowed myself to drop the concept of, oh, I'm supposed to do this or this, and those are my only options. And I really appreciated that, but it did remind me of this process that at times can be like wrestling a bear in the morning when I sit down to reflectively write. And that's all about allowing myself to listen, but it's also about allowing myself to go through kind of this rote process until something quite different comes out. And then that space in and of itself, and this would just be how I interpret it, actually feels quite healing when I enter into that space. When I go for so many days, like I have recently, I've been in the middle of a big move the last few weeks, and my practice drops away. It was very strong at first, and then I was exhausted. I was just like falling into bed, or stumbling out of bed in the morning. But I find it really takes a toll because the mind's just on this rote, go, 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 do, what's logical, what's next. And when I lose touch with that, the spaciousness that just opens up from giving myself time, for that to happen. Yeah, it's healing. And then right after that, transformative. And even if I sit with that long enough, I can get into more of what I would call a Zen state, because then it just all falls away, where none of it really seems to have meaning anymore.
Yeah.
But that requires this kind of creative steps. I wasn't really looking at it particularly as a creative process, but that's what I'm listening to you say. I can kind of apply it in that way now. It's like, oh, I'm taking myself to that right brain instead of the left brain.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, it's I learned that here. It's about showing up.
Show up.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of distractions. I hear you.
Lots of them. Thank you. I mean, it was really just kind of a beautiful way of seeing how it's all connected that you presented there.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Tim. You're an inspiration to me. My mind's kind of just blowing up right now. Thank you. One of the thoughts I had during showing this Chinese landscape from the 13th century was it's all about mountains and rivers, and I'm not getting up to those mountains and rivers anymore. And so David Hinton gave me an outlet. He said, change that, scale it down to fields and gardens. And now this is where I live, in my fields and gardens. And I feel like it's just as vibrant now as mountains and rivers, and I don't have to travel anymore. So that's helpful.
Yeah, you rescaled it like the Post-it paper.
One little story though, you're back in grade school, your story about starting your art. So in second grade, we were told to draw a picture of a dragon, and whoever did the best dragon was going to win this box of Cracker Jack. And I really wanted that, so I do. And the teacher came by and looked at my drawing. I thought I was good enough to win, and she said, "That's terrible. You should never draw again."
Oh no! Oh my God!
My creative process for art.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. I put it all into that box, and it worked out. So maybe I should thank her. I don't know. I didn't spread myself thin. So some teachers shouldn't be teachers.
Yeah, or some people, somebody must have done that to her, right?
Yeah, there you go.
But Bob, you're irrepressible. Nothing's going to keep you down. I miss your shakuhachi.
Yeah, we're thinking her.
Yeah. Bob's story reminds me of a Chinese story about the emperor wanting to hire a sculptor for his new palace that he was constructing. But he wanted an artist who was capable of taking pieces of wood and making them look very aesthetic and real and so on. So he found two of the best sculptors, is wood sculptor. And he said, we're going to have a competition and see which one of you can do it better. And you have 1 week to do this piece of whatever you find to make a perfect copy of a mouse. So the first guy did beautiful, every detail. You could see the whiskers on it. It was so real. The other guy handed him an old fish that had dried out, and he kind of scraped some lines on it. And the emperor was chagrined. He said, how could you dare bring something like that for me? And the artist said, well, you didn't tell me whether to look at it from the perspective of a human being or a cat.
All right. Yeah, wonderful.
So context is everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Bill.
More seriously, in the Heart Sutra, you give me a whole new perspective on that too. Form is not different from emptiness. Emptiness is not different from form. Form is simply emptiness. Emptiness is simply form. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. 3 iterations. And then when I first read that, I said, they're just saying the same thing, backwards and forwards. No, each time you look at each iteration, it changes the context and the presentation. I never thought of it in those terms. What you just talked about now with painting. And you can see it in Chinese paintings. The emptiness defines space, the forms, the clouds. There's no paint there. That's just this bare thing, whatever he's painting on. And very, very helpful, Tim. That was wonderful.
Mm. Yeah, there's what is it, the 5 skandhas? You know, it's a form, sensation, perception. That, you know, I think the Impressionists were onto that. Not that they were familiar with the 5 skandhas, but instead of doing a detailed painting with a secondary narrative, they were just there with the first sensation and form. And we're able to stay there rather than get complicated with human consciousness.
As the second sculptor was presenting
Mm.
for the reaction to the form.
But when I lived in New York, you know, my abstract expressionist teachers saw emptiness. They thought of it as they rejected it as a kind of nihilism, which is sort of a problem with Western philosophy interpreting. So.
Yeah.
Why is it called the Red River?
You know, it's the Red River of the North. It's the one river that flows north on the North American continent. It flows up to the Hudson Bay through Canada.
Mm-hmm. I think we have time for one more comment or question. Emmy, I see your eyes lighting up.
Thanks. Tim, I can't help but ask about, you said something about the contradiction. We can hold 2 contradicting thoughts at a time. And I keep thinking about that because it seems to me like they don't have to be contradictory. And yet it sounds like it could be very creative. And also just kind of taking from the conversation we've just had, it seems like it's something we do naturally, yeah, change our perspective. Is there anything more to say about that contradiction of thought?
Yeah, well, I would go back to what Bill Powell taught me with the Platform Sutra.
Yeah.
That, you know, you have these two sutras. One is, I don't know them by heart. One says there's a Bodhi tree and a mirror you need to polish, and the other one says there's no Bodhi tree and there's no fear. But you know, you can hold those two together. Yeah, I like Thich Nhat Hanh's, you know, The Other Shore, when he talks about the Heart Sutra. He says if you have a stick and you break off the right, you're still going to have a left and a right. You're going to have, whereas a dualistic mind can't hold those two thoughts, right? It's either one or the other. And you know, non-duality, it carries less suffering, no? That you can accept that they're both in.
Tim, the way I remember it is there is no mirror, but we must polish it anyway.
Yeah. Well, that Suzuki Roshi says, you know, we're all enlightened, but we need to do a little work.
Thank you. That helps. I think for me, it comes from duality, the duality or the non-duality idea.
Yeah, that can be a real tyranny of mind, right? Sure, I've been stuck there.
All right. I think we've used our time really well with you this morning, and so grateful to you, Tim. Thank you very, very much for joining us.